Night falls slowly, and if you are an Aquarius, you may have felt something unusual in the air lately. Not a big event, not a dramatic moment like something out of a movie. Just a feeling that is hard to name, like walking into a familiar room and sensing that the atmosphere inside has shifted just a little. Someone's gaze feels different. A conversation pauses the moment you appear, or there is a silence, holding more than what is being said. Little signals like these often pass by very quickly. Many people barely notice them. But Aquarius, your intuition sometimes remembers details that the mind has not yet figured out. And then, quietly, a thought begins to form. What if somewhere, a conversation has already taken place? A conversation where your name was mentioned in a very different way. Not as an ordinary name, but as someone who lives in the space of another person's heart. And tonight's story begins with something very simple, a small secret, spoken in a conversation where you were never in the room. Some stories in life do not begin with a confession. They do not arrive under bright lights or with a dramatic moment that changes everything all at once. Instead, they begin with something very small, a sentence spoken somewhere, in an ordinary conversation, between two people you may not even know. A short sentence, yet carrying more emotion than the speaker may have intended. Not spoken to you, but spoken about you. And sometimes, those kinds of words reveal the most honest truths. Because when people are not standing in front of the person they are thinking about, their feelings often come out more naturally. Aquarius, if lately you have felt as though something subtle is shifting around you, that feeling may not be without reason. Not a big change. Not a clear event that everyone could easily point to. Just a very gentle shift in the atmosphere. Like walking into a familiar room and sensing that the air inside is slightly different than before. Someone's eyes linger a little longer than usual. A smile that carries more meaning than a simple greeting. Or a brief silence that somehow feels as if something is being held back. Details like these often pass very quickly in everyday life. Many people never notice them. But Aquarius, your intuition sometimes picks up on delicate changes that words have not yet explained. You may not know the reason. No one may have said anything clearly to you. And yet, somewhere, a conversation has already happened. A very ordinary conversation. One just like the thousands of conversations people have every day. But with one small difference. In that conversation, your name was mentioned. Not as a passing name, but as someone who occupies a quiet space in another person's thoughts. A space they may not yet be ready to share with you directly. Sometimes people need a little distance to speak honestly about what they feel. A friend who listens. A loved one they trust. And in moments like that, real emotions tend to appear. The interesting part is, you may never know exactly how that conversation unfolded. You may never know what words were actually spoken. But life sometimes leaves behind very gentle signs. Like a breeze passing across the surface of a lake. The water does not erupt into waves. Yet someone paying close attention will notice. Something just moved beneath the surface. And perhaps the story that is beginning now is unfolding through movements just that small. People often believe that strong emotions will always be spoken clearly. A confession. A direct conversation. A moment where everything is finally laid out on the table. But real life rarely unfolds that way. Many deep feelings first appear in the most ordinary conversations. Not with the person the heart is thinking about, but with someone else. A close friend, a brother, a coworker who has heard many personal stories before. A place where someone feels safer telling the truth. Because when we speak directly to the person we care about, the heart can suddenly feel much more vulnerable. One confused look, a silence that lingers too long, a reaction that isn't what we hoped for. Small moments like that can make someone hesitate. So they choose another path. They speak to someone else first, not to create a secret, not to complicate their feelings, but simply because the human heart sometimes needs a quiet, safe space to admit what it is truly feeling. Aquarius, if you look back on your own journey, you may notice something about emotions. Real feelings rarely appear in a rush. They grow slowly, like a seed resting beneath the soil. For a long time, nothing seems visible. Yet beneath that quiet layer of earth, something is quietly taking shape. And if the energy of life lately is reflecting what many people seem to sense, there is a chance that someone may have spoken about you in a very different way than you might imagine. Not as a passing name in a random story. Not as an ordinary acquaintance, but as someone who makes them pause for just a moment when your name is mentioned. Someone who causes their voice to slow down. Someone whose name softly changes the light in their eyes. Moments like that are rarely recorded. They don't appear on social media. They aren't fully retold. And yet sometimes those quiet moments carry the most truth. Perhaps that person is not ready to say it to you yet. Perhaps they are still wondering what their feelings truly mean. Or perhaps they are simply waiting for a moment that feels right. The human heart rarely follows a schedule. It moves with emotion, with experience, with realizations that sometimes even the person feeling them needs time to understand. And so some stories begin not with a confession, but with a very ordinary conversation, all in a place where you were never even there. There is something very fascinating about Aquarius. You often see the world very clearly, the movement of society, the way people change, the larger stories unfolding all around you. Yet, when it comes to feelings that may be quietly moving toward you, sometimes you do not notice them right away. Not because you lack sensitivity. In fact, many Aquarians carry a very refined intuition. You can read the atmosphere of a room within seconds. But what truly makes you different is the way you choose to live. You do not try to control everything. You do not spend much time decoding every glance or analyzing half-spoken words. Your world is wider than that kind of guessing. Your attention often goes to the deeper meaning of life, to dreams, to ideas, to the long journeys human beings travel through. And because of that, when someone begins to develop feelings for you, it may happen very quietly, without you even realizing it, not because those feelings do not exist, but because you are not used to looking at life through a lens of suspicion. You tend to believe that if something truly matters, it will eventually find its way into the light. And perhaps that freedom is exactly what draws people toward you, while also leaving them a little uncertain when they stand close to you. Aquarius rarely sends obvious signals. You do not play emotional games. You do not intentionally make others guess. You are simply yourself, a free spirit, someone walking to the rhythm of your own path. And sometimes that makes the people who care about you pause for a moment and quietly wonder, do you notice them? Is your heart open? Or are you still traveling through your own world of ideas? Questions like these rarely receive immediate answers, so they choose a gentler path. They speak to a friend first. They share their thoughts with someone they trust. Not to hide anything from you, but to understand themselves, to hear their feelings out loud, to see whether what they are feeling is something real or simply a passing spark. And in those quiet conversations, your name is sometimes mentioned in a very particular way. Perhaps just a short sentence, a soft smile when someone brings you up, a brief pause, as if the person is still thinking about something more. To others, moments like that may seem ordinary, but to the person feeling them, they can carry a meaning all their own. Because real emotion rarely begins with grand declarations. It begins with quiet thoughts, questions without answers, and small conversations you may never even know happened, and somewhere in a very quiet corner of this world. A story about you may have already been told in just that way. Every secret in life seems to share a very interesting trait. They rarely stay hidden in the dark forever, not because people intentionally reveal them, but because genuine feelings often carry a life of their own. When something truly comes from the heart, it is a little like an underground stream. At first it is very quiet, hidden beneath the surface, almost invisible. Yet with time, that current always finds its way forward, not through loud declarations, not through dramatic moments, but through very small signals. A sentence spoken without much thought, a glance that lasts 1 second longer than expected, a soft smile when someone's name is mentioned. Details like these are easy to overlook. Life moves quickly, and many people never pause long enough to notice them. But Aquarius, your intuition can sometimes sense things in a very particular way. You may not actively search for signs, yet you can feel when something in the atmosphere shifts. It is a little like the moment when winter slowly turns into spring. No one announces the change. No message arrives. The light simply feels a little warmer. The wind carries a different scent. And somehow, the sky seems wider. Human emotions can change in the same way. Very slowly, very gently. But enough for someone attentive to notice. Perhaps the person who heard that story never intended to tell you. Perhaps they only mentioned a small detail in another conversation, a quiet hint, a half-playful question, or a look filled with subtle meaning when you walked into the room. Nothing in those moments is completely certain. No clear confirmation, just small pieces beginning to appear. And then, at some quiet point, a thought lightly touches your mind, not as a conclusion, just a question. Is something being said about me? The thought does not feel alarming, nor does it carry any negative weight. It feels more like opening a book, and suddenly realizing the main character resembles you more than you expected. You may not know where the story is going, you may not see the whole picture, and yet, slowly, you begin to sense that you are standing somewhere inside a story that is quietly unfolding, a story you never realized you were part of. No, and perhaps the most fascinating part of moments like this is not that a secret has started to surface. It is the quiet realization that life is gently reminding you. Sometimes another person's heart has been thinking about you more than you ever imagined. But Aquarius, imagine that one day, somewhere along the way, you hear that in a very ordinary conversation, someone mentioned you with more feeling than you ever expected. Imagine for a moment that it is true. The most meaningful part of that story may not actually be the story itself, not who said what, not how the secret was passed from one person to another, because stories that travel through many voices rarely keep their original shape. What matters far more is what happens when two people are truly in the same space, the energy between two human beings. That is something that cannot be pretended for very long, and it cannot be fully described through someone else's words. It lives in the smallest details, in the way two sets of eyes meet and linger just a little longer than usual, in the quiet of sitting beside someone, without the weight of awkwardness, in a simple question of care asked so naturally, as if it came from a very honest place in the heart. Moments like these rarely attract attention from the outside world, but for the two people inside those moments, they can carry a meaning all their own. Life sometimes feels like a slow piece of music. There are clear crescendos, but much of its beauty lives inside the quiet pauses, those spaces where emotion is felt more than it is spoken. Aquarius often moves with that kind of rhythm. You do not rush to name everything. You do not feel the need to define a connection right away. You observe, you feel, you allow time to answer the questions your heart is still thinking about. And perhaps that way of living is exactly why certain stories in your life grow at a very unusual pace. Slow, but deep. Like a small flame lit quietly in the night. At first, its light is soft. So soft that many people may not even notice it. But when it is protected, that flame can grow warmer over time. Meaningful connections in life rarely arrive in a rush. They do not appear like a storm. They arrive more like a sunrise. The light begins gently, then slowly spreads, and before you even realize it, the entire sky has changed. Perhaps your story is somewhere in the very early moments of a sunrise like that. There is no need to understand everything right away. No need to force clarity before it's time. Sometimes the most beautiful thing you can do is simply allow a connection to exist in its most natural form. Because when the energy between two people is truly sincere, it always finds its own way to grow, following the quiet, unhurried rhythm of life itself. Life has a very particular way of arranging things. We do not always understand what is happening right away. The pieces of a story do not always appear all at once. Sometimes all that shows up in front of us are very subtle signs. A sentence heard in passing, a half-playful hint in the middle of a conversation, or a look that seems to carry more than the words around it. Moments like that can feel uncertain, just enough to make you pause and think, but not enough to draw a clear conclusion. And truthfully, there is no need to rush toward one, Because many meaningful things in life do not appear as clear answers. They unfold more like a story, one chapter at a time, one small detail at a time. And sometimes what makes a story beautiful is precisely this, not knowing the entire journey ahead of time. Aquarius often understands the feeling well. You are not someone who rushes what is still unfinished. You accept that life needs time to grow, and that human emotions also need time to understand themselves. If someone has spoken about you with real feeling, then perhaps that moment is only the first chapter of a longer story. A story that even the people inside it may not fully understand yet. Maybe that person is learning to recognize their own emotions. Maybe they are gathering the courage to say what they truly feel. Or perhaps life is simply guiding two people closer together, very slowly and very naturally. In moments like that, the wisest thing to do is not to control the story, but to continue living your life with honesty, to remain yourself, to keep walking forward with the values you believe in. Because the things that truly belong to you rarely need to be chased. They find you in their own way, like two rivers that eventually meet, after traveling their own long paths. And perhaps the most beautiful part of stories like this is not knowing what will happen next. It is the quiet peace that comes when you realize life always has a way of guiding things to the place they are meant to be. So, if lately you feel something subtly shifting around you, simply acknowledge that feeling. There is no need to explain it too quickly. Just keep living. Keep your heart open to the world, and continue believing in the value of who you are. Because sometimes, the most meaningful stories in life begin very quietly. From a conversation you never heard, from a feeling someone has never spoken aloud. And then, with time, life gently brings all those things closer to you, one small step at a time.